Good evening, everyone. So far in this series, we've explored how our social identities, our tribes, shape who we are. We've seen how an identity can leap to the forefront in a single moment, and how once it does, we may stop seeing people as individuals and start seeing them as walking prototypes of a group. We've also seen how the self is built through the reflected gaze of others. Tonight, I want to turn inward and ask a question that might sound simple but is endlessly complex. How many selves do you actually have? And of all those versions of you, which one, if any, is the real one? We'll explore three big ideas. First, the notion that a healthy self is not a single story but a rich repertoire of identities. Second, the unsettling possibility that who you are might depend entirely on where you are and who you're talking to. And third, the deep human need to believe that beneath all those shifting selves, there is a true moral core. Let's begin. Part 1: Many Selves and Multiple Identities. The first thing to understand is that the self concept is not a monolith. It doesn't contain just one me. It contains a repertoire of discrete identities, each rooted in different social relationships and group memberships. You are not one thing. You are a collection. Now, two important theories help us understand what this collection does for us. The first is self-complexity, a concept developed by Patricia Linville. The idea is this: having many independent aspects of self acts as a psychological buffer against negative life events. If one part of your identity takes a hit, the other parts remain intact, providing alternative sources of meaning and self-worth. The second is social identity prominence, proposed by Grant and Hogg. This theory adds a crucial nuance. The subjective importance of an identity matters more than just the sheer number of identities. You could have a dozen different roles, but if one of them is overwhelmingly central to how you define yourself, a threat to that single identity can still be devastating. Let's make this concrete. Meet Priya. The top student's exam crisis. Priya is a pre-med student, but she is also a guitarist in a band, an older sister, and a volunteer tutor. These are not just hobbies, they are genuine parts of her self-concept. Now, the scenario: Priya fails a crucial organic chemistry exam. This is her first major academic failure. The pre-med identity, a big part of who she is, has just been wounded. Because of self-complexity, Priya does not spiral into a full-blown identity crisis. After the initial disappointment, she channels her energy into rehearsing with her band and mentoring her younger sister. Both activities remind her that she is skilled and valued in ways that have nothing to do with chemistry. The student identity is under threat, but the musician's sister and tutor identities are unaffected. They provide a psychological safety net of alternative sources of self-worth. But here is where identity prominence becomes critical. Imagine that Priya's subjective sense of self were overwhelmingly anchored in being the academically brilliant one. If brilliant student were her most prominent identity, the buffering effect would be much weaker. The sheer number of other identities would matter less than the fact that her most important one had been damaged. The fall would be far harder. So, the first lesson is clear: a rich, multifaceted self is not a luxury. It is a form of psychological resilience. Part 2: The chameleon self, how context shapes who we are. But this raises a deeper question. Where do these selves come from, and how stable are they? Are you carrying a fixed set of identities around in your head, or are you constructing a new version of yourself in every situation? This is where we enter the debate about the contextual sensitivity of self. Research has consistently shown that people describe themselves and behave differently depending on the context. Even loaded questions can lead people to present entirely different aspects of themselves, a finding from Fazio and colleagues back in 1981. To understand this, I need to introduce you to three theoretical positions. They range from radical to moderate, and they will help us see the self in a whole new light. At one extreme, there is extreme social constructionism, associated with researchers like Potter and Wetherell. This view says the self is entirely situation-dependent. We don't carry stable self-knowledge in our heads. Instead, we construct disposable selves entirely through talk, moment by moment. There is no enduring me behind the conversation. There is only the self that the conversation brings into being. At the other end of the spectrum, we have a moderate position, articulated by Oakes and colleagues. This view agrees that self-conception is highly context-dependent, but it rejects the idea that the self is nothing but talk. People do have some pre-existing self-knowledge. The situation activates different parts of it, but those parts are real and relatively stable. And then there is a middle way proposed by Abrams and Hogg and by Turner and colleagues. This position holds that people do have cognitive representations of self stored in memory, real mental structures. However, these representations are temporarily or enduringly modified by situations. The self exists in the head, but the context decides which self is in the driver's seat. Let's see how these three positions interpret the same person. Meet Lena. The job interview versus drinks with close friends. Lena has a formal job interview at 10 a.m. and meets her childhood friends at a pub that evening. In the interview, she describes herself as highly organized, detail-oriented, and calm under pressure. Her posture is upright, her language controlled. Hours later at the pub, she tells the same friends, "I'm such a chaotic mess, I thrive on last-minute panic." She's slouching and swearing by the evening. This is a textbook case of context-dependent self-description. The situation activates entirely different self-aspects, and even her behavior changes. Now, how do our three theories explain Lena? Extreme social constructionism, Potter and Wetherell would say neither organized Lena nor chaotic Lena is a stable self carried in her head. Each version is a disposable self constructed entirely through the talk of the moment. The interview demands a competent professional discourse, so she builds that self on the spot. The pub conversation draws on a repertoire of self-deprecating intimacy. The self she presents there has no reality beyond that conversation. The moderate position, Oakes et al. Would respond, Lena's self-conception is highly context-dependent, yes, but it is not simply invented in talk. She does have some pre-existing self-knowledge. She is genuinely both conscientious at work and casually messy in private. The context determines which side comes to the fore, but neither is a purely discursive fabrication. The middle way, Abrams and Hogg, Turner et al. Would elaborate, Lena has cognitive representations of herself stored in memory, ideas like I am competent when I need to be, and I am spontaneous and relaxed. The job interview temporarily makes the professional self-representation highly accessible. The pub chronically activates the relaxed self-representation. The situation modifies which self is in the driving seat, but those selves exist as real cognitive structures, not just fleeting talk. So, is there a stable Lena? The answer seems to be yes, but she is a repertoire, not a single note. And the context chooses the music. Part 3: The Quest for the True Self. And yet, despite all this multiplicity and context sensitivity, most of us have a powerful intuition that there is a true self somewhere in there. A core, an essence. Psychologists have studied this intuition intensively, and they've discovered something remarkable. When people talk about the true self, they are not talking about just any trait. They are talking about morality. Researchers argue that moral traits are the most central to the true self. People have a fundamental need to view themselves as moral and good. The true self in our minds is the part of us that is kind, honest, and compassionate. Immoral impulses, on the other hand, are often dismissed as alien, as not the real me. That's not the real me apology. Consider an everyday example. After a stressful day, Tom snaps at his partner and says something deeply unkind. The next morning, he feels terrible and says, "I'm so sorry, that wasn't the real me. I was exhausted and not thinking straight." Notice what Tom is doing. He instinctively locates his moral failing, the cruelty outside his true self and his kindness inside it. By framing the hurtful behavior as a departure from who he really is, he protects his fundamental need to see himself as a good person. His apology reveals an unspoken assumption: my true self is the one that is patient and loving. The ugly outburst was an imposter brought on by circumstances. This everyday pattern shows that when people's behavior violates their moral standards, they often psychologically distance their true self from the act, preserving a morally good core identity. Universality, the soldier forced into unthinkable acts. But is this just a Western, individualistic habit? The evidence suggests not. The tendency to view one's true self in a positive moral light appears to be a universal human trait transcending cultural boundaries. The true self also encompasses hidden emotions, desires, and mental states, and across the world people use those hidden inner experiences as evidence of who a person really is. Consider this scenario. In a war-torn region, a young conscript is forced by commanding officers under threat of death to commit acts he finds abhorrent. Years later, in communities as different as rural Guatemala, suburban Japan, or urban Germany, villagers and neighbors who hear his story often say the same thing: deep down, what he did was not the real him. His true heart was forced into a corner. Despite vast cultural differences in moral codes, the instinct to separate an immoral act from an actor's true self appears everywhere. The conscript's hidden emotions, revulsion, terror, guilt, are precisely what people point to as proof that his true self is moral. They say, in effect, if he felt so horrible inside while doing it, that's who he really is. The behavior is dismissed as situational, while the hidden mental state is elevated to the status of essence. This pattern has been documented across cultures. People everywhere assume that a person's deepest, most authentic self is the one that would choose the good, and they use the presence of hidden inner turmoil as evidence that goodness is the genuine core. Part 4: What we take with us. So, where does this leave us? We've seen that the self is a repertoire of identities, that context can call forth radically different versions of who we are, and that beneath it all we cling to a belief in a moral true self. Let me offer 3 takeaways. First, cultivate self-complexity. Priya survived her academic crisis because she was more than a student. Invest in multiple domains of identity, relationships, hobbies, communities, skills. They are not distractions, they are your psychological immune system. Second, befriend your context sensitivity. The fact that you are different in a job interview and at a pub is not hypocrisy. It is the healthy functioning of a flexible self. But remember, if the situation can construct you, you also have the power to choose your situations. Surround yourself with contexts that bring out the selves you want to strengthen. Third, question the true self story gently. The belief that you are fundamentally moral is a precious psychological resource. It helps you recover from mistakes and maintain hope. But it can also become a trap. When Tom says that wasn't the real me, he risks avoiding responsibility for the hurt he caused. A healthier move might be to say, that was a part of me I don't like, and I need to understand it, not disown it. True self may be less a fixed core and more a direction, an ongoing commitment to becoming the person you believe you are. The self is not a single static thing you find. It is something you build, negotiate, and revise in conversation with your groups, your contexts, and your own deepest values. Thank you.